this kind of stuff, it's all based on his personal grievances. It's so obviously his personal grievances that it reminds me of like just some 20-something in their mom's basement that runs a pro board server and is just losing his mind because people won't stop talking about how stupid they think he is.
Hello and welcome to Tech Won't Save Us. I'm your host, Paris Marks, and this week I have something a little bit different for you. On December 18th, I hosted a live stream for Patreon supporters of the show to, discuss the year in tech, to go through everything, and to announce the winner of the competition that I was running on Tech Won't Save Us's Twitter account for the worst person in tech of 2022. If you're listening now, you may have already heard the winner to that, but if not, well, you can stay tuned to the end and you can hear that announcement. My guests during this live stream were Brian Merchant, Chris Gilliard, and Gita Jackson. I'll introduce them more in the recording itself, but if you listen to the show regularly, you will likely be familiar with them and their work because they've all been on the show multiple times, and I was very happy to have them for this conversation as we discussed many of the things that happened in the tech industry over the past year. I'll keep this short because this is a long recording. We get into a lot, and I don't really feel the need to set it up so much, but I did want to thank each and every one of you who listen to the show, particularly those of you who support the show on patreon.com, who make it possible for me to continue doing this work, to have Eric, our producer, put it together every week, and to have Bridget doing the transcripts for the show that you can find on the website as I am able to upload them. None of that would be possible without the support that we get from you, and of course, just having so many people listen to it is fantastic because it ensures that these perspectives are getting out there more, that people are getting a more critical analysis of the tech industry, of things that are going on in this industry, and of the people who are making important decisions that affect all of our lives every single day. And so, it's been fascinating to see the listenership grow over the past year as it did the year before. So a big thanks to all of you. And in particular, there are some people who supported the show on patreon.com over the past couple months whose names I haven't read out on the show yet. So I want to get through a few of those as we end off the year. So a big thanks to Praveen from Hyderabad in India, Lee in Philadelphia, David Schmoody in Turin, Italy, Chase from Washington, D.C., Zach Odette from Cincinnati, Kelly from Pointe Claire, Quebec, Curtis from Chicago, Benoit Gaudreau, also from Quebec, Alberto from Milan, Italy, Marlon from Nijmegen in the Netherlands, Rudy from Chattanooga, and Orion in Billings, Montana. Thanks to all of you, and if you want to have your name read out on the show, if you just want to support the work that goes into making this possible every single week, you can go to patreon.com/techwon'tsave us and become a supporter. And obviously, I very much appreciate if you choose to do so, and if you support at $5 a month or above, you can also get some stickers in the mail. Now, with that said, enjoy this end of year wrap-up episode, and I hope you enjoy the new year, have a happy holidays, and of course, you'll be hearing from me again in January. Thanks so much, and enjoy this live stream recording. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Tech Won't Save Us live stream, where we are going to review the year in tech. We are going to talk about all of the biggest stories, and we're going to end off this live stream with the announcement of the winner of the worst person in tech, a competition that you listeners, people who are following on Twitter have been voting on for the past few days to pick who is the absolute worst person in the tech industry in the past year. And, I'm sure that people are taking other things into account as well when they are making those decisions. I have a great lineup of people who will be joining us to have this discussion. If you are a regular listener of the show, which I imagine you must be if you're tuning into this, then I think you're going to recognize some of these folks who we have for this discussion. I can see one of them is getting ready. So how about we bring him on right now, a name that you will be very familiar with. Hello, Brian Merchant, and a very nice hat you have there.
Thank you. It's unsustainable, but let it be known that I have signified some holiday spirit. So.
Brian Claus is in the discussion today.
That's right. Ho, 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 ho. everyone.
Yeah. Thank you for that. We needed it. For those of you who aren't familiar, of course, I think you all will be. Brian is the author of The One Device, The Secret History of the iPhone, that we have, of course, discussed on the podcast. And he was on, I believe it was earlier this year, or maybe it was last year, when we discussed the 15th anniversary of the iPhone. Yeah, that was this year, which is kind of wild. You are also the author of Blood in the Machine, The Origins of the Rebellion Against Big Tech, which comes out next May, I believe, has kind of been in the works for a little while. It's this history of the Luddites, looking back to what actually happened in that moment when people in, kind of the middle of England, I guess, started fighting back against some of these technologies that were altering their way of life, and connecting that to what is going on today to give us inspiration for what's actually happening. So, I've had the chance to read the book. It is incredible. And I'm very excited for everyone else to be able to read it too. I will, of course, put a link where you can go and find out more in the chat if you did want to go pre-order Brian's book. Brian, thanks so much for coming on the discussion on the live stream.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is going to be a fun one.
And up next, of course, someone that everyone will be familiar with as well. Hopefully you have read his work on luxury surveillance and many other topics. It is Chris Gilliard, of course. He's joining us. Chris, very happy to have you on the live stream as well. We've had some fantastic discussions on the podcast over the past couple of years. Welcome.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation.
I'm very excited that you could join us. Chris, of course, is a Just Tech Fellow at the Social Science Research Council, and he's a recurring columnist at Wired as well, where he's written some really fantastic pieces lately. Very excited you could join us, Chris. I know I already said that. I'm just so excited. I'm just brimming over with excitement. So happy. And of course, our fourth guest, we would not be complete without them joining us. I will bring them in right now. Gita Jackson, welcome so much to the stream.
Hi, it's so wonderful to be here. I'm so excited to be here.
I am so excited that you could join us as well. We've had some fantastic conversation about the games industry and the film industry this year. I'm happy that you could join us to contribute to our roundup on the tech industry, on everything that has been happening. You are, of course, a tech and culture journalist, most recently at Motherboard, but also at Kotaku as well. You write some fantastic pieces that I always love reading. And of course, you have one recently on Dwarf Fortress that, listen, I haven't read it yet, but I need to because I'm going to have to be playing this over the holidays.
Yeah, it's basically the most important game of all time, which my editor wouldn't let me say that in the article. I had to say one of, but I believe it's the most important game.
I'm happy you were able to moderate yourself so you could get the piece past the finish line.
So we all make sacrifices.
We all do. We all do. I'll tell a brief story because I think I'm allowed to say this now. My editor has been laid off, so I don't really care anymore. I wrote a piece for Time magazine earlier this year. People might be familiar with it. It was about how much Elon Musk sucks. And of course, it came about 8 months after he was named Person of the Year in Time magazine, got all this recognition despite the fact that, he was an absolute terrible person through 2021. And I tried to reference the fact that they had named him Person of the Year and to take a little quote from their article that they wrote about him being Person of the Year, in the piece that I wrote. And we went through several rounds of edits and everything looked good. It was in there. And then, I got a note right before it was about to be published. And my editor called me up and was like, listen, they're really happy with the piece. They can't wait to run it. There's just one thing. I was like, what is it? The reference to Time magazine and Person of the Year has to go. I was like, look, I tried, but to get this piece out there, all right, let's cut it. Unfortunately, you have to make sacrifices sometimes. As you, of course, are very familiar with, all of you, having written for many of these publications. So I'm very excited to have you all join us here. You're obviously all familiar with one another, of course, and with one another's work. And the listeners of the show will be very familiar with you and your work as well. But there are a number of things that we want to get to in this discussion as we, talk about what has happened this year in the tech industry. But of course, I don't think that we can... Oh, you know what? Before we get to the first topic, there is one thing I did want us to start with. And apologies for the listeners on the podcast. You won't be able to relate to this. But I did ask you to wear some sweaters. So I think we need to take a look at our holiday sweaters first. I am, of course, happy to start on this one because I'm very excited about mine. And of course, if you've been on Twitter or read The Verge or something, you've probably already heard about it. Okay, I know. But take a look at this beauty of a holiday sweater. Okay. Look at this thing.
So good. It's so amazing. I love it so much.
Cliffy is just the best, right? Like, I remember being a teenager and like having to write my essays in like Microsoft Office, and like, here's Clippy, you know, to guide me along, to give me all the tips that I need to like use the program properly. And here he is, you know, giving us a little happy holidays. Okay, Clippy, thank you so much.
I would just like it for him to hang out, you know? I didn't ever need his tips. I just wanted him to be there.
Exactly. He was my buddy. He was accompanying me during these essay writing processes. And now everything needs to be simplified, right? And made minimalist. And so Clippy got the boot. I think they should bring him back. I think 2023, we should start the Tech Won't Save Us campaign to bring Clippy back.
Yes.
You know, he's like one of those avatars for like the simpler, like the time when everybody kind of, he's like one of the last like pure things. Maybe let's not bring him into this. Let him rest. Let him like keep him out of the metaverse. Yeah. Keep him out of like, you know, Web3. Like that's just.
Oh, you don't want the Clippy Fortnite experience?
I want Clippy to have died never seeing what came after him.
Yeah.
He'll be revived as a powered by ChatGPT, of course.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Chris, I was thinking the exact same thing. I didn't want to say it and will it into being because now it's going to be real. I'll go. So I have this is the ugliest sweater. Yeah. I went and I visited my friend in the Eastern Bloc when he was doing Peace Corps in Moldova, and they had like this amazing sweater sale, and like this thing is like, I don't even know if it's ugly. It's like majestically ugly. So I'm bringing it out as I do once a year. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. I think it's great. And to know the backstory Paris. Behind it as well, you know, you didn't just order it off the Xbox store like I did. Like, you know, there's some history.
No, I bought it at like a Christmas market underneath a giant hammer and sickle. Like Moldova is like one of those few places that's completely unabashedly like still communist, like old guard. Like they have the hammers and sickles. They've got the Lenin statues. So it was fun to buy some Christmas kitsch in such an environment.
Talking about like the communism in the Eastern Bloc, I was in Romania a few years ago, and I was like, you know, looking around for some like communist stuff. Like you'd find stuff every now and then. And I went into this, like, I think it was called the Peasant Museum. And it was about like, you know, how people kind of lived like in the rural parts of the country, like back in the day and all this kind of stuff. And I like, you know, went through the first floor and I was like, okay, interesting. Went up to the second floor. I was looking around. I was like, all right, you know, cool little like costumes they had, or like, you know, the way they dressed and like the way their villages looked and stuff. All right. And then there was like a little basement, and I was like, you know, I was getting a bit bored with it then. I was like, do I go down into the basement? Like, I don't really know. I was like, all right, whatever. I'll just, you know, pop down there. So I go down these steps, turn the corner. All I see is these like hammer and sickles, like all over the wall, painted onto the wall, almost like a wallpaper. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Turn the next corner. There's like statues of Stalin and Lenin everywhere. There's like this massive painting of Stalin. I was like, holy shit, like this was what I was looking for. Like it was beautiful.
Amazing.
I was like, can I just like take this whole wall and like put it in my bedroom? Like it was like blue with like gold or like brownish like hammer and sickles painted all. Yeah, it was wonderful. Anyway, Gita, you're up next. Let's see your sweater.
Well, I'm wearing the top half of my Neon Genesis Evangelion tracksuit that I own.
Nice.
Hang on, we have to go. There I am. Yeah, it's in the Unit 01 colors. This is what I imagine Shinji wears when he's like courtside at an NBA game or something like that, you know?
I love it.
It feels festive to me, even though, you know, it's all about coming together in the end, basically, just like Christmas. Just takes a while to get there.
Totally. And like we are today, you know, coming together. Exactly. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Chris, did you want to add anything on this topic? Obviously, we're not forcing you to come on video with us. Anything to note?
No, I thought about like a festive glove or something. I didn't have time to acquire it, unfortunately.
Oh, good, man. Yeah, you know, to go along with the hand photo that we always share, we could have put that as your avatar photo, right? I was telling Chris before this, for the listeners, for those of you watching, you can see Chris has a photo wearing like a ski mask on here, and that's the photo that he uses on his Mastodon profile as well. And when I was sharing the graphics for the live stream, I was going to use the updated photo. I was like, this is the one that Chris is using now. I'll use this one. And then I was about to share it, and I was like, wait, every other time that Chris has been on the show, I've used his Twitter profile picture, which is, his hand. And I was like, if I use a different one, will the people like know who I'm referring to if it's a different photo? So I was like, no, we have to use the hand. That's what it has to be. But I'm happy that Chris has updated it here in the live stream.
You saw it here first. That's right.
Yeah. The unveiling, if you're not on Mastodon, I'm sorry, I don't think we're allowed to talk about it now, actually. Elon Musk's new rules forbid us, I think.
It's the forbidden website.
Now that we've gone through our holiday sweaters, had our fun little discussion about that. Now we need to get to the serious topics of this live stream. And, before we get into our big stories of the year, our look backs on what has happened, how can we not talk about Elon Musk and Twitter? Obviously it's been a whole saga since like April and March and stuff when this all came to light, but especially since he took it over. And even just in the past few days, like it's been wild. He went and suspended temporarily all of these journalists, made a completely ridiculous excuse that it was because they shared his real-time information, which are essentially assassination coordinates, that people could have came and killed him and his family, as if, he has had the location of his private jet being shared publicly for many, many years, as every other plane is shared publicly. But this all of a sudden became a really big thing, and the justification for a further crackdown on these journalists for a new change in policy. Then, of course, he was doxing himself today by saying that he was at the World Cup, but that's fine, apparently. And then, of course, today, as he's at the World Cup, Twitter makes an announcement that now you can't post links to Mastodon, to Facebook, to Instagram, to Post News, and to so many other platforms that are either big competitors to Twitter or that seem to be taking users from Twitter slowly but surely. Who wants to start? What do you think of all this stuff?
I think it's just spectacular. What a glorious. I mean, it's like almost fitting. So I'll preface this. I've been writing a little bit about this. I have a piece coming out in a few days in the Atlantic that's kind of about a lot of these trends that we'll be discussing here. But like, he just like has emerged as just such an ideal avatar for like everything that is sort of like buffoonish and thin-skinned and vindictive in sort of the tech titan as we know it today. Like I'm arguing that like this like 2022 in a lot of ways was kind of, it was like kind of a disaster year for tech because we have all these layoffs and valuations are down. There's plenty more stories than the Musk saga, but like it just encapsulates it so neatly. You have like this founder myth, this like genius myth that's sort of like you disintegrating before your eyes every time he tweets. And I think like the meme that's going around where it's comparing Elon to just like the ultimate mod, like just getting furious, just like raging at his own community and sort of blowing everything up. I have been like, really, my breath has been taken away by how foolish. Like, I mean, yeah, sure, we expect all these things. We expect him to let the Nazis back on. We expect the crackdowns on sort of his enemies. We like anyone who's followed Musk knew that many of these things were probably coming, but to see it all so transparently rolled out so nakedly, and he just looks so pathetic to me. Anyway, I mean, I'm sure his fans maybe are sticking with him, but it was like even like. Who was it? Was it like one of those it was like Paul Graham or something who's like, I'm out of here. Like it is even
well, Bari Weiss like backpedaled on her support for him. Like he's losing his own people. That was the wildest thing. To see him in real time unfollow Bari Weiss and the Free Press and then follow J.K. Rowling. That was like a really big sign of bad things to come. It does resemble. I mean, a lot of things about the things that are happening on Twitter right now remind me of other platform collapses. It reminds me of LiveJournal's strike through, which happened after they were bought by a weird Russian company that was actively trying to quash dissent against the Russian government on LiveJournal and silence the blogs of citizen journalists, and then coincidentally just caught up a bunch of fandom blogs in their wake, and fandom people on LiveJournal were in uproar, and after that, the platform really just collapsed. or then more recently, the Tumblr porn ban, which is slowly being reversed, still not all the way reversed. But when Yahoo bought Tumblr, they banned all adult content on the platform, 100% all of it. And that really just led to Tumblr as it used to be completely collapsing. But like more so than that, this reminds me of Something Awful, which was a like seminal internet forum in the early internet that was run by this person, Richard Kanka, who is an abuser and also in 2021 committed suicide after the site collapsed and was forcibly taken from him and he lost all of his money. He is like the preeminent forum mod tyrant. And the kinds of things that Elon Musk is doing right now are just straight out of Low Tax's book, like random bannings just based on vibes, and then randomly taking them back to Taylor Lawrence was banned this morning and she was told that it was going to be permanent. And then they randomly, for no reason, gave her account back. It was wild, like this kind of stuff. It's all based on his personal grievances. It's so obviously his personal grievances that it reminds me of like just some 20-something in their mom's basement that runs a pro board server and is just losing his mind because people won't stop talking about how stupid they think he is.
It's so true. It's so true.
I think you all just don't see the master plan. That's the problem
The
here.
3D chess.
Oh, yeah.
4D chess.
It's up to 6D now, I think.
Wait, I thought I invited Chris Gilliard on, not Kara Swisher.
The thing that I do think is important to remember, though, is that like and I feel like we get like really swept up in all the Twitter, rightfully so. Like you can't look away from it. Like I've never been more like online than I had. Like I feel like I had been slowly weaning myself off Twitter, and then this is just a car crash you can't look away from. But like the conditions that give rise to Musk in the first place, if we look back 2 years or so, we're targeting all the blame on Musk right now, but like let's not forget about the board that like saw a chance to cash out. And just like if anyone cared that this was a public square, or it was already clear that handing the keys to someone like Elon Musk would be a disaster. So I think they deserve as much blame for sort of seeing this cash out opportunity. I mean, that's in a sense, that's what boards do. They see we're never going to get a higher return on our investment than we are right now because this insane person tweeted a weed joke and offered to buy the company for $54.20 a share. And the reason they were so willing to do so was because Twitter, like, let's be honest, but Twitter, we hate being on Twitter, but it had been stagnant and toxic and misguided and poorly managed and all of these things pretty much since its inception. Like it was kind of a sub-monopoly. It has always run up against like the rules, like the difficulty of forging rules to moderate misinformation policy, toxicity. Nazis have always been a problem. And you get the sense that Jack Dorsey checked out last year and fully like this year, but he stepped down as CEO last year because you get the sense he just doesn't want to deal with it anymore. It's become too much of a problem. Like, and this is sort of a running theme through a lot of these companies that have become so big that, they started out with the only aim was to get big. Twitter did it. They got pretty big, if not as big as Facebook. And there's a lot of parallels to Facebook where Dorsey just checked out. Zuckerberg tries to invent the metaverse. People are left trying to pick up the pieces and govern these like almost ungovernable things. And you run into this rock, and then in walks a clown like Musk. And he says, I'll buy it. And they say, yep, you take it. And it's really like an occasion to think hard about, I know a lot of people don't really believe that it is a public square, but it's something, it has some value in the way that it transmits and connects people. And it is an occasion for us all to think pretty hard about it. I mean, we're laughing as the ship goes down, but there's no really good alternative. I mean, we're on Mastodon, we're on whatever, but
yeah, I mean, I've been on Tumblr before. I was on Tumblr before I was on Twitter, and I ended up being on Twitter because as the Tumblr community was stagnating in the initial sale to Yahoo, most of the people I was following went to Twitter. And I've done this song and dance dozens of times before. I have just run off different collapsing platforms, trying to find the people I found the funniest and the smartest and the nicest somewhere else. And it really hurts to think again I'm going to end up losing serious friends. And it's going to hurt more now because I'm an adult and I understand how hard those connections are. that's really been bothering me, even more than just like professionally. Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing, but it has been really helpful for me professionally. I got tons of gigs off of Twitter, tons of them, just because of how everyone was on there. It's a centralized resource of everybody. That's what made Facebook valuable after a while. That's why people started saying that Facebook should be like a utility. It's basically the phone book, and it feels very similar to Twitter. Just these things should never have been in the hands of private corporations in the first place. These are now like part of the fabric of our everyday life, and it's like if someone just decided to cancel the phone book. It's just gone. That feels so weird to think about, but that was like if in the mid 90s, pre-internet, there was someone Elon Musk just bought whatever part of the government makes the phone book and was like, we're not going to have these anymore. It would be, this is kind of what it feels like.
Yeah, I think to build on that, the ways that these systems, Twitter in this case, operate as public infrastructure makes it, amidst the comedy, makes this really tragic and dangerous. Whether that's having a way to filter through the misinformation about COVID or, disaster relief or, all the ways that minoritized communities, disabled folks have found community. It's really worrisome because no other thing does that in quite the way that, real time that Twitter does. And yeah, again, like I personally have benefited tremendously from being on it. And so that is the thing that worries me is, I feel very privileged to, I left the day that the purchase became official and I have not tweeted since. But I'm very privileged to do that. I think a lot of people don't have that available to them. And, like municipalities, there hasn't been, as far as I know, someone can correct me, but there hasn't been like some kind of like massive disaster climate thing in the States since the takeover that I know of. But I'm afraid for that time to come and how people are going to get information.
Yeah, no, and especially now if they're limiting links from other platforms, and a lot of local governments use Facebook to push a lot of stuff out, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Brian, you were going to ask something.
Oh, I was just going to say, Chris wrote a pretty great piece a few days ago with Kashana Gray in Wired, talking about sort of the digital migration and how it's like yet another digital migration for these communities, for Black communities. And I was wondering if you had any insight, given that, like, I feel like if you are on Mastodon or something, you just see like people are just coming, like people are leaving. So like what is, and again, most people are like making it this joke and it is funny because sometimes all you can do is laugh. But I do wonder, what is really sort of being torn apart as this happens, as these migrations happen.
Yeah, I think Kashana's great to work with, and it was really interesting writing a piece where we were kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. She's kind of team ride it till the wheels fall off. I think one of the things is that people want to go to something that's already Twitter, like they want to go to the next Twitter, kind of not understanding is not the right word, but sort of not realizing that the Twitter we all started on is far different from the Twitter that we're on today or, have been on for the last couple of years.
Yeah, back in the day when you would write RT and, someone's username and
SMS. It was literally SMS.
I remember tweeting from my phone. That was a real thing on my freaking college campus.
But I do think, the other thing is I think the other big platforms have missed a gigantic opportunity, to spin out something on the fly, where, another place where people can migrate to. Like Google, I wouldn't do Facebook no matter what, but like I know lots of people would.
Weren't there some reports from Meta saying that they were trying to think about a text-based platform? If you look at Tumblr, it sounds like a joke. I'm going to be the Tumblr evangelist here, but if you look at Tumblr, they are trying to take advantage of this hard. It was surprising to me that Elon Musk didn't explicitly ban Tumblr because they're using the official branded Tumblr account to promote their service every single day. They just launched a live streaming service too. They're trying to become a real competitor in the social media space. And I feel like for the people that get screwed over by the recent Twitter rules, it's dangerous, as Chris pointed out, in that governments can't use this to send out disaster relief information and stuff like that. But also, any kind of person who is creative on the internet is now completely screwed over by this rule. On the most basic sense, the class of people that get screwed over most frequently, sex workers now rely on things like Linktree because their accounts get flagged for adult content. They have to link to platforms offsite. But then if you're also if you're a visual artist that uses Twitter, and a lot of visual artists, ironically, moved from Tumblr to Twitter because of the porn ban, you now also have no way to direct people to your Instagram, which is a much better venue for looking at drawn, illustrated pictures than Twitter is, because Twitter compresses your images. There's now no way to use Twitter for something that people have been using Twitter for this entire time, which is to promote yourself off platform to try to make some money, because there's a horrible, the economy is taking a huge downturn and everybody needs some cash.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just for the listeners, in the policy that was announced today, it's not just you can't link to Facebook or Instagram or Mastodon or whatever. You also can't use a Linktree to link to a bunch of other services as well. It's explicitly outlined in the policy that they have promoted, just to kind of back up what you're saying, Gita.
You also, I saw, you can't DM these links to anyone either.
Really?
So not even a private
Say
DM.
what?
Yeah, they will block the DM.
Oh
yes,
my goodness.
Yes. I saw someone try with a Mastodon link. You can't send a DM.
Wow.
It'll be blocked.
Wild. Yeah, you need to remove Mastodon usernames from your Twitter name or Twitter bio as well, or that could get you suspended too, is the part of the new rules. Yeah, it's kind of very, very kind of broad brush,
Should I have the Mastodon link in my bio. Should I keep it in and see when they ban me, or should I take it out and try to ride this ship into the
I think everyone is on the same username everywhere, tip right now. So people are just tweeting out same username everywhere and letting people find you that way.
As a blue check, I haven't been able to change my name.
Yeah.
I got really lucky. I was Italian Elon Musk until yesterday, and then yesterday it worked.
Before we move on to these kind of other stories that we've been talking about, I do just want to echo the things that, all of you have been saying, right? Twitter has been very important for me for building this podcast, for building a writing career that I have. And so I've certainly been very conflicted seeing Elon Musk take it over and kind of the consequences of that. And especially now as we see it kind of splintering, right? As, Twitter was this kind of place where everyone kind of was, especially in this kind of ecosystem, right? Especially when it came to news and journalism and writing and whatnot. But also many other people who are reading those sorts of things, who are engaging with it. And if it does splinter, it's not I think as Chris was saying, it's not like there's an obvious Twitter alternative, right? Whatever else we're going to is something that is different from what Twitter was. Maybe it has good things about it. Maybe it has drawbacks. But it's not Twitter. There's not another Twitter. And so whatever we choose, wherever people go next, however that splinters, it's going to be different. And I think as you're saying, Gita, seeing people fan out to other platforms, potentially losing people who you were connected with on a platform that already exists, and that you've been active on for a long time. I think that's one of the biggest worries that I have as I see people move to Mastodon and post and co-host and Tumblr and wherever else, is that I'm not going to be on all those places, and I'm inevitably going to lose people that I like being in contact with.
Also, sort of just referencing what Chris and Gita were saying, it's the most interesting thing about Twitter is that it has everything that is good about Twitter. Not just the communities that have formed, but from an engineering standpoint, all the features, it was built by the user base, the whole @ symbol, the whole RT mechanism. It was just a whole cycle of looking at what are these people doing on the platform that's interesting, and then actually implementing it. And then that allows communities to say, it says, okay, this is an interesting place to be, and it attracts people that way. So it has always been a 90-10 split. I mean, the amount of actual governance that they do, it's been interesting to look at the Twitter, the Twitter files, quote unquote, these, whatever it's a room full of people trying to make some tough content moderation calls and not always doing the best job and having some weird relationships. But there's hundreds of millions of people that use Twitter. And for years and years and years, it was more or less being governed. This has led to a lot of problems, but we can safely say that everything good about Twitter was built by the user base. So the question now for me is how do you harness, how do we, can we take this as an opportunity to learn from this? Like Mastodon is maybe too far the other direction, where it's like you actually have people having little power over their fiefdoms and they can just sort of like mass ban.
It also gives me forum moderator vibes there a little bit, because it is, you are relying a lot more directly on the community that you place yourself into. And for me, that makes Mastodon a little bit less attractive, because due to my experience on the internet, I don't really trust these self-moderated communities very much. I've been in too many bad forums. But there's also, I'm thinking that we really might be headed in a direction that makes me a little sad, but feels like the most likely. I know people younger than me, they mostly interact with their peers on a series of like decentralized Discord rooms and Discord servers. And that is beginning to feel like the way that I'm going to keep up with my friends, close and far away, and also interact with a large group of my peers that are into the same things that I'm into, that are semi-anonymous, but also semi-friendly, which is sort of what I look for and enjoy about Twitter. But it's not the same thing. It's like not the same thing at all. It is more private, which is in some ways better, although Discord has a lot of problems as a program and Discord has a lot of issues as a company. But it is also, we're all going back to chat rooms. It feels like we had this great experiment with making all of our chat rooms public, and now we're all just going back to IRC.
And maybe that's healthier in some ways, but
the thing that makes it great is also the thing that makes it terrible, and so we have to reckon with that, and maybe and when Gita, you referred to as an experiment, like it's very easy for me to say it was a failed experiment, despite the successes, because some of the affordances, like just some of the things that come with it are like unquestionably bad, and so like is that's a hard sort of hair to split.
Yeah, because it's like Discord has issues, but it doesn't have the issue that Twitter did, where like something like 80% of all Black women on Twitter were getting like intensely harassed daily.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for this discussion on Elon Musk. Obviously, we could not avoid it, and Twitter and social media and all these other things. I'm sure, unfortunately, it's going to be something that we're going to be returning to a lot in 2023 as well. As much as I'd love us not to be, thinking about and talking about Elon Musk all the time, but he knows that he benefits from having his name in the headlines, that from having his name on everyone's tongue and in everyone's tweets constantly, and it's just hard to avoid that when everyone else is wrapped up in it too. I don't know what we do about Elon Musk, to be quite honest. So I want to move on to some other big stories. I asked you all, if you had a big story that you wanted to highlight. And I would say, I was saying big stories. Maybe this is like a massive story that we've all been talking about. Or maybe you have a story that is kind of, maybe was under the radar and that should have received more attention as well. And that we should have been talking about in 2022. That was really important and crucial and all these sorts of things. And so I let people in the order of Brian, Chris, Gita. How about we do the reverse in talking about stories? I know I'm putting anyone on the spot, Gita. What do you think? What is your story that stands out to you?
Well, I have a story that might feel like it's not a tech story, but I think I bring it up because I think it is a story that people should think of as a tech story. It's the story of HBO Max and Netflix this year, with the CEOs just massively changing how these platforms work, and consumers and users of these platforms and the people who make content for these platforms suffering so greatly. I did some reporting talking to animators that have been affected by the cuts and layoffs at HBO Max and Warner Brothers. And it is like a pretty grim scenario out there for animation right now. Animation is very similar to freelance writing in that people kind of live gig to gig, and it's difficult to get a staff position because the experience you're expected to have is supposed to be as a staffer, and you are most likely going to just be working freelance to freelance to freelance. I actually spoke with someone who went from a cushy paid gig to a contract gig at Warner Brothers and then was laid off like 3 weeks later, which really, really hurt her. And what she said was that throughout this experience, the level of disrespect to animation, she said, was like to her, like insane to her, because during the pandemic, animation was one of the few areas in entertainment that could continue to work exactly the same. And as soon as the budgets got tight for these companies, animation was the first to go. But what this person said to me was also that this will come to live action eventually. Everything that happens in animation, it's like a canary in a coal mine for the ways they will cut budgets in live action. And we are beginning to see this. And Why is that? It's because ultimately HBO Max, Netflix, those are tech platforms. Netflix especially is a tech company. It is a tech company that is trying to enter the entertainment industry, but it is running into problems because they were too successful, essentially. You know, they no longer have the benefit of just being able to buy the back catalogs of a lot of wonderful movie studios, because all of those studios have also started their own streaming platforms. If you go to Paramount, it's wild. The service is like not very good at all, but they do have all of Star Trek, which is great. And they have all of these really good classic Westerns that you just can't watch anywhere else. And they're like, well, the people like Westerns, and Paramount historically has made a lot of Westerns. So here we go. You know, and it's really, you know, it's the same for HBO Max, just wild. Warner Brothers has an incredible back catalog of really amazing films, and you can't watch them anywhere else. And you see, though, on HBO Max, it becomes, once you look at these as tech platforms, it doesn't become about archiving that work, you know, in the way that the sort of the Criterion channel does, and it doesn't even become about creating and promoting good work. It becomes about crunching numbers to have the most financial success. You can see this in the way that Netflix cancels literally everything before it gets its third season, if it even gets a second season. Even if it's really successful, or even if they've spent a lot of money promoting it, like the Cowboy Bebop show, which people didn't like very much, but they put everything they had into promoting that show. They got Yoko Kanno from the original Cowboy Bebop to do the score. They spent all that money, and then it didn't reach a certain arbitrary metric, and it was canceled immediately, like within a week, which was wild. And then you look at HBO Max. I saw the woman who wrote the book Made for Love, which was a big splashy pickup for HBO and was turned into a series with 2 seasons, a great sort of anti-tech show, actually, which I think is fantastic. Alyssa Nutting, yeah, she was tweeting on Friday about how Netflix has not only canceled her show, they're going to literally take it off of the platform so that they don't have to pay royalties on it. These become anti-art companies when they use the same kind of business thinking that tech uses in order to maximize profit. And it's scary, and it's going to keep happening.
I'm so happy that you brought up that story, because as you well know, and I think as listeners will know, this is also a topic that I pay a lot of attention to, read a lot about, write a bit about, you know. I wrote a piece recently in Business Insider about Netflix and the whole streaming space, and like how stuff is changing big time, right? And just to note, you know, you said Netflix canceling series after the second season. Usually the third season is when there's a bump in kind of pay and things like that for actors and you know, show creators and all that kind of stuff. And so they don't want to do that. And so that's why many of the shows get canceled at that stage. I think it is so fascinating to see how things are changing in that space after like a decade of really positive headlines around streaming, and how it was going to transform the entertainment industry, and how it was going to be so positive for creators and viewers and everybody, right?
And it's not exclusively negative, in that it's really amazing that I think like everyone in the world can watch a movie like We're All Going to the World's Fair, which is now streaming on HBO Max. It's an incredible Sundance favorite that would have been really difficult to find and watch before the streaming era. It's just, I mean, have you look at Steam recently, the video game platform Steam? If you've ever tried to just browse Steam, there's just so many games. It becomes impossible to navigate without a human curator doing it for you. And we are approaching the place where I think all streaming services, because they are designed to give you everything, it becomes, you end up not actually understanding how to watch things or what to watch. I feel the same way about Spotify, actually, where the lack of an actual human curator, the algorithm, I feel like, is insufficient in actually giving me interesting new things that I want to listen to. And the glut of just, here's everything, it becomes impossible to navigate.
So you're saying Gita Jackson's favorite streaming platform is Apple TV Plus?
I
don't know that far.
I don't know about that. They function more like a normal studio, and that Apple has more money than God. So they can just make these really high production value things. Is it good? No,
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'll take a season of C over like some random horrible documentary on Netflix about some true crime bullshit.
Oh, and a fellow C fan. Oh my goodness.
This is
Wow.
Jason Momoa, right?
What a bug.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's a very funny premise, but go on.
I hear that show is
But no,
bonkers. Is it like, isn't the show just insane?
It's
Yeah.
wild. I mean, it is as a fan of like fight choreography and like filmic violence, it's something to see.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, I mean, no pun intended. I mean, like yeah, I don't want to nerd out on it. I'll save you.
Yeah.
I'll save you the analysis.
We have a bonus podcast.
Yeah. The C podcast. Where we all get together again. Not the Motherboard Dune series. The Tech Won't Save Us C series is what we'll be doing.
There you go.
But no, I do think it's fascinating to see that there's like a broader reorganization that seems to be happening, after all of this kind of hype that was around streaming for so long, where we've not only seen so many other companies enter it because they felt forced to because of, the success of Netflix, the demands of investors, the belief that streaming is the future, it's how everything needs to go, et cetera, and how there's a realization that because of the shift in the funding model on these series, that often they're not even as like financially lucrative as the model that existed before, where you'd make your TV show or your movie and then, there'd be multiple other releases and right sales and things like that. It wouldn't just sit in a streaming catalog. And it seems like this is one thing that Warner Discovery is trying to start to do, is take things out of that catalog, resell them. I don't know how well it's going to work in their case because they seem to be just like destroying everything that they touch right now, David Zaslav. But I do think it suggests that there's going to be kind of a broader rethinking of what this actually looks like, of whether it was positive to go down this road with this particular model to kind of put all the eggs in the streaming basket, or many of the eggs. But then the other piece of that too, as you bring up in talking about the animators, is that there's a big kind of worker piece to this, right? And we've already seen with the kind of threatened IATSE strike, I believe that was earlier this year, with the talks about producers and writers, there's the threat of a writer's strike next year, I believe, because the contract is coming back up for renewal, and they chose not to really push too hard on it because last renewal was during the pandemic. It was really difficult, et cetera, et cetera. But this is kind of the moment where if things are going to happen, we're going to start to see it this year and next year, with workers pushing back and demanding a lot better kind of pay and treatment from these streaming series, as they've been carved out and not had the same expectation as like traditional productions for a long time.
Yeah. We're also seeing some animation workers at Nickelodeon are actually trying to form a union, which would become the largest animation union in the United States, I believe. For them, the way that they were treated is really rank. I spoke to a creator who said he was not even given a physical copy of his own show that he created and pitched to them. The person that made Dexter's Lab and all those wonderful cartoons on Cartoon Network, he said that he came to Warner with 16 original IP, and they only accepted it if he would do reboots of his old series. They don't get residuals. They only get flat fees. It is very, very difficult to make a living in animation right now. So imagine if they're treated so poorly, imagine what's going on also in live action and other sectors of animation, where the people who are not the most highly paid and the most highly lauded, they're also being treated terribly. Like, it's just, even on a television show like Apple TV's Severance, which was an incredible show about issues in labor, workers who worked in that show said that they had issues getting paid on time. And this is not an uncommon thing to hear. No matter the subject matter, no matter what, I've heard from many people that work in film and television that people really know the union codes because they know how to get around them. And workers are not only impacting their bag, but it's impacting their health and their safety. People die making movies, and it shouldn't be true.
Yeah. And Apple has more money than God. They can afford to pay this money. Bridget in the chat says that she would love to see a See Tech Won't Save Us podcast. So maybe we'll have to follow up on that in the new year. Chris, over to you. Do you have a story for us, something that you've been following that you think we should have been paying more attention to, that was really important, that we should have been talking more about?
Oh, there are so many. I mean, I think building off of what Gita talked about, I'd love that we could talk more about, Stable Diffusion and DALL-E and, Chat GPT, which is, they're either going to save the world or destroy it, depending on who you listen to. But I'm also really interested in the work that the Markup's been doing about the ways that like hospitals and banks and universities are all still feeding information to Meta and to Twitter. I think I hope, that there's going to be some reckoning with this, particularly given everything that we talked about in the previous segment. And like, I feel like Chicken Little talking about how dangerous things are, but again, it's like it's super dangerous. Like, really, I mean, like this whole system should not exist, right? Like, if I go to a college website, or if I go to a bank, or if I go to like, a portal at a hospital, like, why is that information going to Twitter? Why is that information going to Facebook? And, it again speaks to how little to no regulation there are in these spaces, that we're all, in a lot of ways just kind of left to fend for ourselves, but like I mean, much like the pandemic, in ways that we're even prevented from doing that. So those are, to me, a couple of stories. I mean, certainly the machine learning, art, and text generating things have gotten tons of press. I think in many ways, though, like really poorly thought through press. Like, if I see one more essay where they're like, oh yeah, we just wrote these, GPT just wrote the first 4 paragraphs you read, right? Like, stop that. Okay.
Could you tell? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's not cool, and it's not interesting, and it's also building on exploited labor. And like, I mean, like, just stop, right? Like,
it reminds me of like when like VR was the thing for a while, and every lead would be like, I'm in a giant shining spaceship. A hand down. This isn't reality. It's virtual reality. Like,
right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I hate to like constantly hammer this, but like, I don't like, we're doing a lot of the PR work for these companies when we do that, right? And I wish people would understand that and like act upon it appropriately. Because every time you write some gee whiz thing about these things, even like, I mean, I hate to be a curmudgeon, but even when you use them, right, you're like acting on like a foundation of like racism and misogyny and exploitation, and like legitimizing it. And I mean, they've got like enough platforms to do that for themselves, right? We don't have to help them in that job.
Yeah. And Sam Altman, who is, of course, leading OpenAI, which is funded by Elon Musk and many others, is basically out there arguing that, even if there's, racist stuff and whatnot in ChatGPT, for example, that's okay. Like, whatever, we'll work it out, what have you. Don't be too worried about it. And then the other thing is just like, when you see these stories that are reporting on it and like not kind of giving the critical perspective, like, I wonder how long it takes for like tech media to really like learn its lesson, or like to start thinking more critically. Like, just to give an example, like, during the whole crypto boom, there were obviously a lot of skeptics like me and many of the guests that I had on the podcast who were saying like, tech media needs to be doing more to point out how this is all like a load of bullshit, right? It's a bunch of speculative scams that are really going to hurt a lot of people when this bubble kind of collapses. And, as all these kind of rug pulls and things were happening in the moment. And I noticed the other day that Casey Newton, who, runs Platformer, was formerly at The Verge, published like his kind of recaps of 2022 and what to look for in 2023. And one of his predictions was that pro-crypto and anti-crypto people were going to kind of go at each other more in 2022. And he was like, oh, but actually all the crypto skeptics were just right about everything. It was like, okay, awesome. But like, are you going to like learn from that and take that forward when like the next big tech thing comes along that, all the tech industry is promoting? Or are you going to treat it again as a new thing that we need to kind of give the benefit of the doubt to and see if it's actually going to work and report what the industry is saying and then a bit about what the critics are saying, maybe, if we let them into the stories at all? Or do we just go back to what happened before again and have to repeat this whole cycle?
Yeah, as an erstwhile video game journalist, I have to say that it does really remind me of the lack of coverage that video games got up until the point where Epic Games became such a powerhouse in the tech industry, because of Fortnite, where there were always some incredibly intense issues about video games. Because one weird guy wanted to ban all of them from stores in America, we all decided they were unproblematic. But actually, there's a lot going on, and the critics should always be given way more room to talk about them instead of violently harassed out of journalism.
I mean, I read something in one of the, one of those prominent critics had said something to the extent of, I had to buy a bunch of crypto if I wanted to like adequately critique it. And I'm like, what? Like, no, like I don't own a Ring doorbell, right? I don't have an Alexa,
Yeah.
right? Like, like that's actually like not true.
We've certainly talked about that tech journalist on the podcast before.
I will say that like what does give me encouragement, just to sort of temper some. I mean, I share all of your the diagnoses and how grim this could be, but both with things like Chat GPT and image generation and this precarious. The one thing that I will say, it also plugs back into to Twitter, where some of these communities live. But I will say one thing that heartens me are sort of the massive communities of people who are now willing to sort of stand up and say no. As the resident Luddite of the crew here, I will say that 10 years ago, that sort of reaction to like a new technology, like, yeah, there's all these people giving it oxygen and saying like, look at this cool thing. But it's a lot of the usual suspects, and just how unified a lot of the illustrators and the critics have been in saying like, this is horseshit. Like, I wish it was stronger and more powerful, and I wish more institutional voices would lend credence to it and approach it with the same level of skepticism. But seeing that no, and we saw a little bit of that with Web3. It's like, oh, this is the future, and people were just like, fuck no, it's not. It is not. It's not like having been a tech journalist like for like 15 years now. Jesus, that ages me. But like would have been unthinkable like 15
we got
years
Grandpa
ago.
Brian on here with us.
But like, like here's, Apple's new. If Apple like did some Web3 NFT BS like 15 years ago, it'd be like, let's check this out. People are like getting more comfortable just kind of in the saying no, or in that true Luddite mode, just saying like, this will not serve me or my community, and the answer is no. Like, smash it. We need to find ways to nurture and grow that, and sort of give people more space to say like, yes, we can just reject technology, but there are a few good instances. Like, even if it's a killer robot like that San Francisco wanted to deploy to like murder people, it was like there was enough of an outcry. It was like, okay, no. We've seen some cases with facial recognition tech where like there are red lines, and we can't, the work that I feel like a lot of you folks are doing are pushing that line a little bit. I feel like there's still hope, is basically what I'm saying. And seeing sort of the reaction to some of the Chat GPT stuff, some of the more like onerous overreaches of the tech industry, there's still reason to think that it can be battened back sometimes.
Yeah, that's a super fair point. And I do think the pushback has started to come sooner, than we're typically accustomed to seeing in the last, 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, I don't want to overstate it. It's not like it has any real institutional power, but it's a start. Like, it's a start.
Yeah. The mere fact that Jimmy Fallon and Paris Hilton are being actually investigated for defrauding people, that it does mean something. And it is kind of remarkable to realize that we could yell crypto out of existence. I think artists might have a harder fight in that these tools could be used in conjunction with artists, alongside artists for nonprofit reasons, and to make tools that are useful for art makers to make. But instead, they're being funded by corporations that are interested in replacing artists. So it is neat to see artists on a website like ArtStation take a really strong stand and say they do not want any AI generated art on the platform, and continue to go. Like, if you go to ArtStation, all the number one trending images of art right now, it's either stuff from the new WoW expansion or an image that just says no AI art. And it's very, very cool. And it's cool that everyone's taken such a unified stance. I think it's also cool that some of the artists were like, we think that these data sets are unethically sourced, and we need to have a way to have an ethically sourced data set if you want to continue to use this technology. It's neat that people are taking the time to learn how this technology works and to pinpoint the thing that is actually unethical in a really salient way. But it is a hard fight because, as Paris mentioned, OpenAI is being funded by some incredibly powerful figures in a way, and because it is such a fun toy for other people, it is more of a commodity than NFTs were, which, NFTs were just so immediately useless that you could just kind of shout at them and make fun of them until they went away.
Yeah, I do feel kind of heartened that Maybe this is overstating it, but I do feel like the criticism of Web3 and crypto really made a difference over the past 2 years. Whether that was forcing journalists to have to say, like, look, there's a lot of people who say that this is like a load of bullshit and it's actually going to hurt a lot of people. We're not really sure, but some people are saying these things, and then to see it all collapse, like, obviously it's been really great and really exciting. And just to pick up on the AI art point for a second, like, part of it is to make you believe that there's no real kind of human input that's happening here, right? Whereas obviously a lot of the art is kind of using work that has actually been created by humans and kind of recycling this into things that already exist. There was a story I read that OpenAI has people who are testing it, who are ranking things, who are kind of making adjustments to the AI and all these sorts of things. Like, not the actual people who are kind of working on it in more of a development sense, but kind of like, your content moderator type people who are poorly paid and who are kind of testing these things out. So all this is going on, but OpenAI and Sam Altman wouldn't want you to know those pieces of it because it doesn't fit the narrative that they're selling. Brian, I want to move to you now. What is your kind of big story of the year that we should be talking about, or that was particularly notable to you?
This year just kept happening. I'm going to cop out and cheat and sort of like reiterate what I was saying earlier, because I feel like one of the things that was really interesting about this year is that it really did feel like, in a lot of ways, of sort of a year of reckonings for big tech and the big in that what had sort of been so key to their business models, which was so often sort of like just naked exploitation, sort of finally hit a wall. I mean, I think the biggest story of the year, probably in my eyes, at least as somebody who follows tech and tech labor, was the Amazon labor union getting the first victory. It's been tumultuous since then, but what a historic moment. I mean, Amazon has just pulled out all the stops to be just sort of like the biggest, most organized union buster in modern history. I mean, they've just been ruthless, as we would expect them to be. And to see that victory and sort of the effect that it had in sort of providing some further momentum to other organizing fights. I think the fact that organizing continues to sort of, move into tech spaces or places that were thought of as tech companies, the horizons are expanding. So, I mean, that was, what was Amazon's secret sauce this entire time? Like, the only thing that they could do is further and further squeeze, surveil, and basically harass their workforce into working more through these weird productivity games and through working alongside increasingly automated robotics. And finally, when workers say enough, pandemic related, I think we finally saw that was maybe just one bridge too far, if they're not willing to, again, this huge company, so rich and well resources, not willing to do the basic things to protect their workforces. It's led to this huge sort of, and now it is everywhere. Even if it's not, they're not, they've had a few setbacks. It's still stalling. It was enough to stall Amazon out. It was Amazon lost 10,000. They had to fire 10,000 people this year. They had to. They don't ever have to, but they claimed they did because growth was slowing. There really is a thorn in their side, because if they can't exploit labor as cheaply, as they could 10 years ago, then their whole equation is off. You see that now with Twitter and Facebook and the social media networks. If they don't want to solve content moderation, the whole thing comes apart. It's too toxic. It's a mess. Founder gives up and the wheels come off. Even Apple, to some extent, is having like a whole, I mean, it's the only tech giant this year that had a successful like financial year. All of the other ones sort of crashed and burned, but Apple, there's problems brewing under Apple's hood too. They're doing this. They're just churning out the same devices year after year, relying on the same exploited workforce in China year after year. And you see ripples in that. That whole thing could come apart too. They're trying to get into the ad business. They're just giant monopolies. And this year we saw them doing things that Apple would never, saying we're gonna start running ads on our app store. We're gonna sort of turn the screws even harder on anybody that wants to post apps or anything in our ecosystem, because it's basically an admission that they've become the monopoly that everyone's known them to be for a long time. So I think that it's really interesting, all of these factors coming into play, and that's without even touching on Google or Microsoft, who also both shed thousands of jobs and have missed their revenue targets and are kind of spoke, especially Google now, kind of scrambling to see what, and it's this weird paradox where you have these companies that are the wealthiest, most powerful companies ever, but they're kind of losing the plot in the face of labor uprisings, antitrust movements. So you kind of get the sense that maybe they're more brittle than they seem to be, and with forceful organizing and some smart regulation or legal action, some serious blows could be dealt to their supremacy.
Was that Chris Smalls led organizing? That was this year?
That was this year, May 2022.
Wow. This year was 600 years long.
Right?
God, Lauren K. Gurley, now at the Washington Post, former motherboarder, just excellent coverage on that. If you want to read anything about the movements leading up to the union win, she really just nailed it. I think that is the most important story of the year. I mean, there has been an incredible labor movement rising in the past few years. The fact that we're seeing a lot more sort of unionization movements in the entertainment industry as well, and in video games, which is, there is a Raven QA, which is a part of the huge corporation Blizzard. They successfully unionized, making them one of the first video game unions in the United States. And if you haven't read any of Jason Schreier's work about the working conditions in video games, I would definitely check out his book. I would also just check out any of the sort of deep dive, post-mortems on video games he's written at both Kotaku and Bloomberg News. I was kind of clown on him for working at Bloomberg News, but I love that dude. But it is, the most famous letter, I think, is the EA spouse letter of someone who's just a wife of someone who worked for EA, describing moving every year, their kids becoming more and more depressed and not being able to make connections, and their husband just sleeping at the studio and becoming more and more sick and haggard as the studio essentially worked him to death. So it's really needed. And for years, tech has been a sector where the workers there have said, oh, no, we don't need unions because they've all been paper millionaires. And now you can have as much money as you want, the biggest salary, that you could have, and you can still really be exploited, like really, 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 really exploited.
I worked at Medium for a year and a half, which is a, tech company founded by the Twitter co-founder, Ev Williams. And, during the pandemic, he blamed us, the writers, for starting a union drive, but it was just as much the developers, the computer engineers, the coders who had been there for years and had been, as you just said, exploited in their own way. Just, they're making some money, but I think events, shocks like the pandemic can make clear like the real value of some of that. And then when it's like, wait a minute, I am being asked to work around the clock. I'm being treated like garbage. I'm not being protected in ways that I need to be protected. I'm subjected to harassment. It's like there's reason, and you saw it catch fire. We saw like they were as much leading the organizing effort as the editorial staff, who a lot of us had been through some organizing drives before, but the tech folks, they were excited about it in a way. They had talked to the folks at Kickstarter, the Google union, like that is coming too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's so exciting. I just want to note, Megan in the chat says the People Make Games crew has opened my eyes to some of the games industry issues. They're fantastic. Obviously, Quinn was on the show earlier this year talking about their Roblox investigation, which was really important. And Zaxtronaut says, shout out to the ZeniMax QA union as well. Of course, there is also a union up here in Canada, in Alberta, that formed at BioWare, the QA workers there. So it's really been fantastic to see that happening in the video games industry. This kind of broader organizing that's happening in the tech industry as well. And I'll just say, to pick up on the broader point that Brian was making, actually, I should note as well, we talked about some of these labor issues with Wendy Liu on the most recent episode of the podcast. If you haven't listened to that one, it's very good. We dig into a lot of these issues as well. But I think that we are in a moment where there's something going on with the tech industry, right? And I think it's very exciting. Like things are very much in flux. It's leading us to this kind of moment of recognition of really what is going on in this industry, what these companies are really all about after selling these images of themselves for the past few decades, really misleading people as to the effect that they were having in the world. And really in the early 2010s, how incredibly positive a lot of the coverage was of these companies, the desire to believe that they were making this really positive difference in society, and then how that really started to change in the latter half of the 2010s as there was more of a critical look at these companies, at their impacts. And it does feel now that more tech workers are going to be forced to recognize the kind of contradictions of the industry as these companies cut more of the benefits, try to cut pay, lay off many thousands of workers, as you were describing, Brian. Amazon has done 10,000. It says that it's actually probably going to do 20,000 going into next year, right? And many other companies have laid off a whole crazy ton of workers. As these interest rates have been raised up, that has really put pressure on the model that the tech industry pursued of taking advantage of this cheap money, being able to grow and not have to make, incredible profits and things like that, though some companies certainly have. But it is kind of throwing a lot of the expectations of the industry into flux. And it allowed these workers in the industry to demand a lot, to expect a lot. And it's kind of forcing those things to change as well, or, empowering the bosses to push back further on labor, on workers. And I think that is certainly going to come to a head in whether it's next year or the year to follow. But I think that there's a fight coming.
I want to add that I think one thing that is maybe making that fight come faster or easier, but as Chris talked about, like these hospitals sending user data to Facebook, like the game, if we look at the tech that we're actually using now, and I think that's why I didn't bring it up to say that Apple's not making new cool stuff anymore, but that cumulative effect, if you go online, it sucks. You go on Twitter, you're larded with that. Go do a Google search. It sucks. It's ads. It's a terrible experience. And now even your phone, it's shiny and nice or whatever, but it's the same. Big tech can't even distract us now. Their products are curdling. It feels like people are looking at their online experiences, their experiences with technology, and increasingly, even if they are not realizing yet, and maybe it's the job of journalists and commentators and people to coax that out of them, but to say for what? For this? This is where I'm handing over all of my data, increasing amounts of my money, paying rents on my creativity, paying actual rents, to use these services for something that sucks. And I think there's a sense, and even if it hasn't been articulated, that it's there and it's brewing. And so that's what I'm going to be, just to jump ahead, that's what I'm going to be looking for in 2023, the ways that this starts to manifest. And in some ways, these tech giants are making it easy for us. Zuckerberg's the next big thing is the metaverse. By the way, it's the worst thing you've ever seen.
The next best thing is legs.
Wait, I can have legs.
You can have legs in Final Fantasy 14. Paris, you of all people need to become an elf in Final Fantasy.
I do love elves. I think this leads really well into the topic that I wanted to discuss and the story that's really stood out to me for the year, which is the radicalization of the tech billionaire class. This is not entirely new. We've seen it for a while. It's been kind of bubbling, I think, under the surface to some degree and above the surface in other ways. Obviously, we've known about Thiel and those folks for a long time, but I feel like a lot of other kind of tech billionaires have tried to keep their really right-wing views, their kind of radical views under wraps for a while. But we can really see that kind of stepping up this year, in particular, in the past number of months, and to a lesser degree, through the pandemic period more broadly, I think. I often think back as kind of a moment that really kind of says, we need to further champion ourselves and what we're doing in the world. I believe it was April 2020, It's Time to Build essay from Mark Andreessen that's really kind of saying, the tech industry, we've done all these great things. We're not being properly appreciated for all that we're doing. We are making a big difference to responding to COVID, to making all these scientific advances, all these sorts of things. And what we need to make the world a better place is not less tech, not less of the tech industry, but rather for us to be present in more aspects of society and more aspects of life to really kind of push ourselves in this way. You also see kind of in the months following that, a greater backlash against journalists. Andreessen is leading this to a certain degree, but many other billionaires are involved in it. Clubhouse is kind of big in pushing that sort of narrative in the moment that it in the time that it kind of has its moment. But now we've seen, I think it's fair to say, a lot more of these tech billionaires really come out and be very explicit about their politics, about their belief that they should not be challenged, whether it's from journalists or average Twitter users or what have you. And I think that that is going to have a real impact in the year ahead. It's kind of like a mask off moment increasingly for the tech industry, for someone like Elon Musk, for many of these people. It also shows us that they are going to be, you know, there was this narrative of the tech industry as like diverse and as responding to concerns and as, you know, having a really positive impact in the world and all this kind of stuff in the 2010s. You know, I think we're seeing a very different picture of the tech industry, and we need to recognize that and recognize the problems with the narratives that existed before as we move into this kind of new period or whatever you want to call it. And it also shows how they are going to be pushing back more on workers, as we were talking about with Brian's comment and your comment, Gita, but also how they're going to be more forceful, as we're seeing Musk do with Twitter, but as we're seeing many of these other tech billionaires do as well, in really trying to reshape the world around the way that they think it should work, but to serve their interests as well, because ultimately they think the world should serve their interests, and they're going to pretend like it's something that serves everybody, but it's a world that's for them. It's kind of a politics that's about them. Yeah, so I think that is something that is really important.
I mean, to me, I know she's not a tech billionaire, but the person that most exemplifies this arc of keeping it under wraps and then going full mask off once you realize that you're insulated, how insulated you are by your money, is J.K. Rowling. And I do think it's significant that someone like Musk is now giving J.K. Rowling attention and positive reinforcement by following her back on Twitter. You know, these are J.K. Rowling's violent anti-trans rhetoric, which she is now on the platform wishing people happy Turfmas. So far gone. It is now so open and so unashamed because she knows she has nothing to lose. And I feel like at this point, people like Musk, he really is in an enviable position. The company is private. He can enforce his rules and make whatever rules for his website he wants. It's what makes him a tyrannical forum mod, is that no one can stop him. And that safety afforded to billionaires by their money, I think people like Thiel already knew it, but some people are newly realizing just literally how much power they have. And they will do anything to protect their power. And it's terrifying.
Yeah. And I would just note on the Musk piece, I can't not say this, but it's particularly, you know, Musk is a person who's surrounded by yes men, right? People who will tell him what he wants to hear, a person who goes and seeks out the people who will tell him what he wants to hear, as we've seen with the types of people who he's been interacting with on Twitter as he's been pursuing this sale. But, you know, he has David Sachs, who's a reactionary conservative, who's pushing particularly reactionary politics in California, who's taking Peter Thiel's lead on the types of candidates and causes that he should be funding in American politics. He is right now at Twitter, Musk's kind of right-hand man, whispering in his ear, giving him advice on what to do. And then on the other side of Musk is Jason Calacanis, someone who has been, you know, licking Elon Musk's boots for a couple of decades now, who will do anything to be close to Elon Musk, as we've seen most recently from the leaked text messages from the Delaware court trial, where Jason Calacanis is sucking up to him like so much harder than everyone else, you know, telling him to put me in the game, boss, and telling him, you know, I give you my sword, or, you know, like the Aragorn line from Lord of the Rings. And at one point, Musk has to kind of come back on him and say, because he's out kind of selling the Twitter deal to all these other people, and Musk has to kind of message him and say, like, you're Morgan Stanley and Jared, who's Musk's like finance guy, say that you're making me look bad. Like, you need to stop this kind of stuff. And then after the Twitter takeover happens, Jason is like tweeting as though he's in charge of all the policy and stuff. And once again, it's kind of leaked that Musk has to tell him to like stop tweeting so much because he's not as powerful as he's making it look. So that's just to say Jason Calacanis is like a total bootlicker, and he sucks. But yeah.
And I hope, I mean, maybe along with this, we can finally put a nail in the coffin of the myth that Silicon Valley is liberal. You know,
yes, please,
yes,
because I think it's important that you named it as a mask off, right? Because this is always who all these folks have always been.
This is the level of how conservative that Silicon Valley is, right? This year, there is a Dalit speaker from India that was supposed to come to Google, and the Brahmin Indian Americans there protested until he was uninvited. Importing conservatism from literally other countries at this point. It is nothing more than a hierarchy that is built to uphold the values of the most powerful, like no matter what genre of most powerful you are.
I do hope that it is also a year in which an increasing number of people like look at somebody like Elon Musk and say, this is a clown. Like, this is not like a visionary. Like, this is, I mean, that myth is so powerful that, this founder myth that it's just built into sort of like the structural integrity of capitalism that you need to believe it. Otherwise, the whole thing comes down. Like, we need to believe that the most wealthy people are like capable, like visionary people. Otherwise, the cracks start spreading. This is a pretty big crack. It's hard to look as anything but sort of a diehard Musk fan at just his actions of the last 2 months and see anything other than sort of pathetic, like clown, like in over his head. You could see it real time. You're like seeing broadcasts, like how he's just like, I mean, everybody says like ultra divorce guy energy, and he has it. He does. And on top of that, it's incompetence. Like, he found an arena where he can't cosplay his way out of sort of like the archetypal entrepreneur. He can't just like put on the face and like rattle off a bunch of statistics that he memorized about, launching rockets into orbit. He has to actually sort of, he doesn't have to, which is the really interesting part. He's made it public. He's been tweeting, he's been sharing all of this voluntarily. And it's been Mask Off is right. And I hope that this translates into that sort of general sort of liberal founder genius myth sort of crumbling away. And I hope it's in time for folks to strike back at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so strong, again, and not to hammer on the press, but there are people still invested in, kind of designing these elaborate scenarios by which, like, this is a master plan, right? Yeah. Like, yeah, he totally tanked his other company. Right, is constantly leveraging like his other company, and the stock isn't half of what it used to be or something like that, right? But it's still a master plan, right? Like this is it's so deeply embedded in how we think about. I mean, I don't want to say we, right? It's how many people think about wealth and work and capitalism and this country, right? That they can't like operate outside of that, right? It must be that it's just something that we're all not like too dim to recognize, because otherwise, like everything, every belief that people have about how this country works would crumble.
100%. I mean, it's a testament to how like strong this, like, we haven't even talked about Sam Bankman-Fried in this. Like, this is another, he got away with with that sort of visionary imprinting for so long, and it just complete fraud. Adam Neumann before him, like Elizabeth Theranos.
In so many ways, the genius founder myth is just the myth of America. And what we're watching is that myth collapsing in so many different kinds of arenas just in front of our eyes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, as Brian's saying, like, there's so many other topics that we could have discussed, right? From Sam Bankman-Fried, the wider crypto crash, the organizing in the games industry. We touched on that a little bit, but I think that's an even bigger topic. The Meta implosion, everything that Mark Zuckerberg is up to. There's so many other stories that happened this year. Even the kind of ones that we forget, like Razzlecon and the $5 billion heist that we found out about, and all these other kind of, hilarious stories that were just make up the kind of weird space that we're all following so much and so involved in, for better or worse. We're coming to near the end of our hour and a half. There are a couple more things I wanted to finish up with you. So I want to do a quick round on the things that you'll be looking forward to in 2023. I know we mentioned some of those things as we were going through those stories, but I think just to quickly, if there are certain things that you're looking out for, so maybe the audience can say, as they're observing stories next year, hey, Brian or Gita or Chris mentioned this, that this is something that maybe I should pay a little bit more attention to in the year to come. So what do you think, Brian? Let's start with you.
I will be looking, just to pick up on something that we haven't touched on yet, is sort of the Biden administration signaled that it's going to be sort of changing how it looks at the classification of gig workers. So I'm going to be watching that. And I'm going to shout out Vina Dubal, because I've been talking to Vina a little bit, and she's flagged for me a lot of the fights that are coming down the pike potentially next year, where you're having a lot of the sort of like Lyft and Uber and the gig app work platform companies are now trying to sort of enshrine in law this sort of third category of worker where they're not an employee, they're not just a plain old sort of wantonly exploited contract worker. They're just like they're a semi-exploited middle category where they're entitled to some like very meager benefits. And Vina and a lot of observers and scholars and myself think that this is a terrible deal. And in some cases, they're getting even some unions to sort of go along with it, thinking something's better than nothing. But and in some cases, it's being fought tooth and nail. It's usually on the state level. There are bills coming down I think in New York, maybe Illinois, but it's basically what happened with Prop 22 here in California, where I am, where they sort of did this super expensive proposition campaign to sort of overturn a law that sort of classified gig workers who met the requirements as employees, and sort of instead it said, well, here's your consolation prize. You can get some minor benefits. And it's really, again, all the things that Gita's talking about, like the direction of and sort of the trend towards more precarious work orbiting like a more concentrated sort of little bastion of wealth that can dictate all of these employment conditions in the games industry. It's just that is like more and more the model. And depending on what the circumstances are, it can look more or less, the same. It's being done even by some of the major tech companies, Google's, and for like formerly quote unquote, white collar work like lawyers, and it's all being degraded into contract work very intentionally, and people are being kept precarious. So
I feel like that's a topic that has kind of been under the radar with everything else that's been going on this year, even though it was, I think, had a lot of focus in past years. But thus, these fights are still ongoing. Uber and these gig companies are still trying to pass these laws in parts of the United States and around the world. We've seen it in Ontario, up here in Canada. There are successes being won in other parts of the world. Like in the UK, we saw there was a success. Other countries in Europe, in Australia, there has been some progress. There was a ruling in New Zealand recently that was positive. So these things are still continuing, but I think this is an issue that's definitely coming back and is going to be more at the fore in 2023. Chris, what will you be watching for next year?
Yeah, a couple things. I'm really interested, obviously, in education technology. I think some of the things we've talked about on the show today, my guess is that there'll be a sort of ramping up of the student surveillance industrial complex to try and, in their words, right, like fight back against all these new methods that students have for cheating. But the other thing I'm really interested is, a thing we didn't get to talk about is how Amazon basically came out and said Alexa was a failure.
Yeah.
And so I'm super interested. Like, it's shocking that they admitted that, but I am pretty sure that this coming year we'll see lots of initiatives to try and convince people that it's actually not a failure, right? Whether it's putting it on wheels or whatever else they're going to do. So that's a thing that I'm looking out for.
That's fascinating. And yeah, that was a great story to see how Alexa hasn't worked out as planned. And certainly that's the case for other Amazon projects. Drone delivery is another one. That there was a story earlier this year how, they were promising that all these things were going to be delivered by drone, and then, that hasn't really worked out either. And I feel like there's been more admissions by more and more tech companies that some of these kind of bigger ideas, these kind of moonshot projects, these things that were positioned as the future are maybe not working out as planned. And I think we're going to be seeing more of that as the cheap money dries up, as there's more pressure on business models, as these companies are reassessing what is going on with them. Gita, what will you be watching for in 2023?
I'm most interested in the intersections of tech and the entertainment industry. So I am really going to be watching like a hawk the IATSE contract negotiation that's upcoming. But there is sort of a story that is also like kind of a tech story, which is all of everything's technology to me. But I've noticed over the past couple of years that there is an intense change in the availability and reach of non-American cultural products from other countries, especially Japanese cultural products and Korean cultural products. They have broken through into mainstream music and culture and movies in a way that is, I think, unprecedented in the United States specifically. NPR named Bad Bunny one of the biggest pop stars in the world. And there's a huge campaign to have it nominated for an Oscar. These things are now accessible. Anime, I think, this year has had the most mainstream normal success that it's had, not just among hyper fans, but among people that just generally like good television. You will see more people trying out shows like Spy Family or even Chainsaw Man, which I think is going to explode in the coming year. Tech services have been, the Shonen Jump app has made these things so much more accessible. Internet communities have made it way easier if you're a K-pop fan to learn everything about your favorite pop stars. And we're watching this sort of cultural hegemony that America has enjoyed for the entirety of my life. You called one summer of 2 Latin American artists having number 1 hits in America the quote unquote Latin invasion when I was in middle school.
Oh my God.
But now we're at a point where, yeah, it was wild. Like Livin' La Vida Loca was enough to call it a Latin invasion. That was how American our airwaves were at the time. And now that it's just not true, and it is not true anymore. Like BTS is unstoppable, and RM, the lead singer of BTS, just got interviewed by Vogue. We are approaching a place where the global village of the internet, it is coming true. What we're finding is that people are not as interested in only keeping up with American art. So I'm really curious about how that story is going to continue to develop in the coming year.
Yeah, as American geopolitical hegemony, evaporates or is threatened, its cultural hegemony is threatened as well. That's fascinating. And, it's very much a story that I will be watching a lot next year as well. What goes on with, the whole streaming services, in particular, what goes on with these fights between workers and these major entertainment companies over trying to define what the future of the entertainment industry is really going to look like, how people are going to be compensated, all of these incredibly important questions that are still in flux, that are still up in the air as a result of, technological disruption, so to speak, but also corporate power and the consolidation that has enhanced it, that has allowed this to continue, and that has really required workers to kind of come back and try to force the companies to reorient and actually benefit them. For me, on my side, obviously we're in this moment now where the tech industry is in flux, as we were talking about, as the companies are waging their war on workers to try to reduce benefits, reduce pay, to cut the number of workers. I'm certainly interested in what that is going to mean for organizing, what that's going to look like next year. That connects to what we were talking about with the entertainment industry, but, more specific to the tech industry itself. But I'm also interested in, after this moment of all the share prices are going down, these companies are cutting jobs, they're admitting that Alexa and things like that weren't working. We're obviously eventually going to come out on the other side of this thing. Interest rates are going to come back down a bit. I am looking forward to seeing what they are going to position the next big thing as being, right? During the pandemic, Web3, metaverse, they were the next big things. I think we've kind of defeated those to a certain degree. I think there's a recognition that those are not going to be the next big thing. Maybe metaverse will rear its head. We'll have to see. But I think that there's definitely going to be something else. I think that AI and these AI tools is going to be part of it. I think that we're seeing these companies make a greater focus on health and health tech, getting into the healthcare sector. So that's something I'll be watching in particular. But I think that there's going to be more than that as well. And I think that we're going to need to be on guard to see what they're going to try to do, to see the narratives they're going to try to push for what this future is going to be, what it's going to look like, how they're going to make the world such a better place through technology, so that we can be prepared to push back, as people so successfully did during, this part of the pandemic where Web3 was ascendant, where the metaverse was not as ascendant, but was still being pushed by companies with a lot of power and influence and things like that. So I think that's the thing that I'll be watching most. And so with that, I think we need to move on to announcing the worst person in tech of 2022. Now,
oh my God, is there a drum roll?
Yeah,
there's got to be a drum roll.
Are there any stats about how many people voted? Did we get a lot of votes? What do we?
So we got many thousands of votes. This has been an exciting contest. I kind of came up with it on a whim. I saw other kind of brackets going around, and I was like, why is there not a bracket to pick out like the biggest piece of shit in the tech industry? we need to do this. And if no one else is going to do it, Tech Won't Save Us has to do it. So I very quickly put one of these together. I realized that, based on the time I was doing it, it would align perfectly with this live stream. So we could announce it here for the supporters, then put it up on Twitter for people to see afterward. There were certainly a lot of people
assuming you don't
get
banned.
Yeah. Maybe I'll go back to Twitter in a minute and find I'm banned. I did, as we were talking about earlier, Elon Musk did self-dox earlier. He said he was at the World Cup. He posted all of this. Yeah, I posted a picture of him and Kushner and, picking up on David Sachs's tweet the other day, said there's a 2-for-1 deal here. If anyone has a spare GPS guided missile that they want to use, on this World Cup stadium. So who knows? Maybe I'll be banned for live doxing, sharing assassination coordinates or whatever you want to call it. But maybe not. Maybe I will return and I can still post the winner to Twitter as well. So I think it was really fun for me to see, people's thoughts on all of these tech billionaires, to see who they thought were, not all of them were billionaires, let's be fair, to see who they thought were the worst. Like in round one, I was really surprised when Mark Andreessen beat Bill Gates. I thought there'd be a bit more hate out there for Bill Gates, but his PR narrative has been really successful. Chris Dixon, of course, A16Z guy pushing crypto. He beat Sam Altman, who was pushing, these ChatGPT, these other AI services. And that one was kind of back and forth for a while. Andy Jassy and David Sachs were paired up. Andy Jassy, CEO of Amazon now. David Sachs, venture capitalist, whispering in Elon Musk's ear, reactionary conservative. I feel like not enough people know who David Sachs is, and that's part of the reason that Andy Jassy beat him. But that one went back and forth as well. Round two, we moved on. Dara Khosrowshahi was up against Sam Bankman-Fried. Sam took it because he's been in the news a lot. He's a big Ponzi king. But I think Dara Khosrowshahi's impact has actually been worse, if I'm being honest. As you were talking about, Brian, with trying to rewrite these laws, he's the CEO of Uber, for people who don't know. I think he should have taken that one. But the people voted. Vox Populi, Vox Dei, or however you pronounce it. The people voted for Sam Bankman-Fried. He made it through. Round three, Bankman-Fried was up against Mark Zuckerberg. Now, Zuckerberg took this one. It's not super surprised. I think there were some people who were arguing Bankman-Fried should have taken it, but I think Zuckerberg is a much worse figure who has a much longer history of doing really terrible things. So I think that one was justified. Then we got to round four. That was the final four. We were down for the kind of semifinals. Yeah, I'm not a sports guy. Okay, Peter Thiel versus Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos versus Elon Musk. This was a tough one, I think, because we're really getting down to the end there, right? These are some really evil, horrible people, some real ghouls. But the people voted for Peter Thiel and Elon Musk to move on to the finals. Now, this is really interesting, right? These are the PayPal guys, right? Peter Thiel is Confinity. Elon Musk is X.com. Those companies merged. They're what we know as PayPal today. Elon Musk was the CEO of PayPal, and he was ousted by Peter Thiel and his people who came from Confinity. I believe X.com had more money, and that's part of the reason why he became the CEO of this kind of merged company. There was a lot of bad blood there as a result. We don't really know what their relationship is like right now, but we do know, or it's been kind of reported that Peter Thiel has called Elon Musk a fraud. And Elon Musk has called Peter Thiel a sociopath. So, I think they're both right.
Yeah.
worst person JPEG.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's wild to see this matchup because I used to work at a Gawker site. So it's like the guy who's ruining my life right now versus the guy that was ruining my life previously.
Absolutely. And this is so fascinating to me, right? Like, it's a tech audience, so people kind of know Peter Thiel. But I feel like Thiel he emerges sometimes, but usually he's under the radar. And a lot of people don't realize all the shit that he's really up to, the stuff that he's funding, the stuff that he's been involved with over the years, his really kind of racist background and pushing a lot of really terrible things when he was at Stanford. And after that, when he was trying to make this kind of conservative provocateur career work. Then obviously later he founds Palantir, which is this company that's really working with the U.S. military, other U.S. government agencies, increasingly other militaries and things around the world, really involved in kind of mass data collection and things like that, enabling those kind of business models. As you say, funding the lawsuit against Gawker, with Hulk Hogan to take down that website. and so much else. He's a vampire. He's trying to get the blood of the young people so he can live forever. Like all all this stuff that I feel like people know a lot about Elon Musk. I feel like people don't know all the details on Peter Thiel. And so it's fascinating to me to see that there's still that kind of hatred there. Of course, funding fascists, friends with Donald Trump, all these, or maybe not friends, but close with them politically, all these sorts of things. And then Elon Musk, geez, how long do we have to go through this list of just like terrible things that he's done and been involved with over the years? I think it's fascinating that as we're having this mask off moment with him right now, there's a kind of remembrance that he's always been an asshole among some people. Like, remember the Justine Musk essay going back, when was that? 2011, when she was talking about how terribly he treated her, how he called her like a starter wife and all this kind of stuff. And those sorts of things are kind of returning to the fore now in recognizing that Elon Musk is this like terrible, hated figure, as more people, recognize that the narrative we've had about him for so long has been wrong and he's just always been a terrible asshole. So with that said, let's get to the results. I was not surprised that this was very close, okay? That it stayed close for a very long time. These are two people who are very hated. I watched the results. Some people were mad because I did Twitter polls before this where you can just do your vote. You can see the results. This one, I wanted it to be private, so I moved it over to a Google form. Some people were mad about that. I think it was justified, right? Like, you want the surprise with this one. It's the end.
Big
it's
reveal.
the final.
Yeah, you got to build the
exactly.
drama, of course.
Exactly. You don't want to just click your button and see it. This one was very close, okay? In the morning, one person was leading, then another person overtook and kind of kept a very, very narrow margin of lead. I closed off the voting just over a half hour ago so that the votes are closed. Let me tell you, my Google thing says it's literally 50-50. Obviously, one has more votes than the other, so it's good that I can see the difference. There's literally like a few votes in the difference between these two people. It was so close. But the winner of the worst person in tech of 2022, the Tech Won't Save Us competition to pick the worst tech person of the year. I was going to say ever, but it's of the year, is none other than a horrible tech billionaire named Peter Thiel.
Whoa!
Who takes the crown?
Wow.
Yeah.
Very principled of people to vote for Peter Thiel while all the Twitter stuff's going on. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, Thiel is playing a long game.
Yeah.
That's what's scary about Thiel. Is that this ideology has been festering for decades, and it's not just someone imploding in public; it's someone who has goals, and that's really
and with like
scary.
the
I thought
patience.
recency bias was gonna win the day.
Me too. I did
Yeah.
too.
Really did.
Yeah.
But it is. It's the difference between a buffoon and somebody who nominally sort of knows what they're doing. And they are, you talk about somebody who is at least aspiring to play 3D chess. Like Peter Thiel is content to do that. He's content to not be in the spotlight most of the time. He's content to fund like these neo-fascist candidates that may or may not win. Apparently he was really mad when Blake Masters lost. That was a funny story. But
It's so funny because he's the least charismatic man.
he's like just a Teal clone. He's like a mini Teal, just like this guy could go far. And he's like, oh, like just so strange. I agree. Like he's like very actively attempting to use his influence for anti-democratic, racist, fascistic. Like he's not shy about this. That's what he's trying to do. And so I'm kind of glad that he won because I think he's the worst of the two evils.
Obviously we were talking about like a mask off moment earlier. I feel like Peter Thiel has really been kind of living these values, living these politics for a long time, kind of showing a lot of the valley, you can do this. Like there's a growing kind of constituency who is open to these things, who is willing to embrace you for saying these things, for championing these politics. And now we see, after Peter Thiel has been very open about these things for such a long time, that more and more of the valley are embracing it, are being open about it. Not to say that many of these people never felt it before, but it's being open in a way that I think is more dangerous and more concerning than it's been in a long time. Just to close it off, as I said, one candidate was leading in the morning. Elon Musk was leading initially, but Peter Thiel overtook him this afternoon, my time, of course. and kind of kept a very narrow lead. But as I said, it was a very, very narrow lead, and it was it's kind of wild. It's pretty cool. Yeah.
Even a loser at being the worst.
But yes, so I will post this on Twitter soon, so everyone else will see it. For those of you who are in the live chat, early, of course. I guess you can spoil it for your buddies if you want to, but it will be posted soon enough. I just need to make a graphic. And I, obviously I want to close by thanking our fantastic guests for joining us on this really, I think, insightful live stream where we've discussed so many important topics about the tech industry, so many things that I think will be relevant in the year to come and even following years. So Gita Jackson, tech and culture journalist, thank you so much for joining us. Chris Gilliard, Just Tech Fellow at Social Science Research Council, thank you so much. Brian Merchant, the author of The One Device, and next year, Blood in the Machine. You will certainly be back to talk about that. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to chat with us, to share this time. And of course, people on the regular podcast stream will be able to hear it in the future too. Thanks so much to all of you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. That was fun.
Yeah.
This was so much fun. I had so much fun talking about horrible things and horrible people with you.
Gita, maybe we need to do a anime and NC podcast in the future.
Yo, just hit me up, because I literally, all I can think about right now is Chainsaw Man, and I need to deposit those thoughts somewhere.
This has been fantastic. Thank you for including me.
And more pods emerging from the live stream. We love to see it. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks, of course, for supporting the show. Just to close it off, it's really been a fantastic year for Tech Won't Save Us, for the podcast. The listenership has just grown immensely. The support that you, the listeners, the supporters on Patreon have given the show has just really been incredible. It wouldn't be possible without you. Obviously, it also wouldn't be possible with our fantastic guests. Some of them, 3 of them, are here with us on this live stream. To be able to get their insights, for them to give us the time to make these episodes, to do these interviews. Of course, it's so important for us to hold these tech people to account, to ensure that there's a critical narrative getting out there when, there's such an overwhelmingly positive narrative with so much of this tech stuff, or at least, trying to be neutral and to play both sides and things like that. So thank you so much for taking the time. Thanks for supporting the show. Thanks for watching this live stream. And of course, we'll be talking to you again soon.